All right. So if you've had tests and measurements, you're going to be like, I already know this, but that's okay. We're going to go through it anyway. Some of you haven't had tests and measurements. So, what is a test? It's a systematic procedure for observing behavior. What do we mean by systematic? It's administered in the same way across groups of people. So, this is a very different approach than relying on letters of recommendation, where we don't fill out like a form. We say whatever we want to say in a letter of recommendation. In a test, it's going to be systematic. Everyone's going to experience the same version and style of the test. It is what it is. It's been designed to be administered a certain way. From that test, it's going to give us the ability to describe behavior using numerical scales or fixed categories. So based on your answers, we're going to be able to give you a score, or we're going to be able to categorize you. So tests are oftentimes referred to as predictors because we're going to be able to use numbers to predict future behavior, right? Oh, I managed to work job analysis in pretty early in this chapter, didn't I? Because we're going to use job analysis to identify whatever criteria need to be measured by a test that will help us to predict performance. And so we are going to, once we discover what the criteria are for the job, we either are going to locate existing predictors, or maybe we have to create our own predictors. I would recommend really hard not developing your own tests. If an existing test could be modified, much better to go with that than to go from ground zero developing your own test. That's a job for a psychometrist, not for us. If you do not love writing items, administering those items to test participants, doing the statistics on those items to see if you're actually asking what you mean to ask. If you don't enjoy doing that, don't write your own test. That's all I can say. It's very time consuming. It takes years to develop a new test. All right. If you are thinking, well, where am I supposed to find these tests that you're referring to that I could either just locate or I could find one and then modify? There's a book that is updated every year called the Mental Measurements Yearbook that has every test known to psychology. Every test on every subject that you could possibly think of is warehoused in this Mental Measurements Yearbook. And so if you don't already know of a good measure of what you're trying to get at, you can look it up in the Mental Measurements Yearbook and find something that either will on its face already be a pretty good test of what you're going for, or maybe just changing a few words. I'm using a scale that was originally designed for employees, but I want to administer it to students. So I just went through and modified it so that every place that it says work, I put schoolwork. So that was it. It wasn't a huge modification, but I was able to find something that was going after the subject that I was interested in, but had been intended for employees. So I was like, oh, easy fix. That is my best advice for how to get tests, how to get these predictors. All right. So how do we use job analysis to link up with the measures of the knowledge, skills, abilities, and others that we're interested in? All right. So far you've seen a flow chart like this so far. We got job analysis that leads to these job specifications. We got the knowledge, skills, abilities listed here. So let's say that we're hiring a professor. So under knowledge, we would expect them to have advanced knowledge in a specific discipline. So if we're hiring, let's say, a psychology professor, we would expect them to know about psychology and not, we wouldn't expect their primary knowledge to be like biology, something like that. We would expect advanced knowledge in my brain wants me to say broader domains. So we could look at some what we call biodata, which is just actual data that is confirmable and objective. So we could look at their transcripts to see if to serve as the biodata, to see that they've taken specific classes, taught specific classes, had research on specific topics. That the research part would show up on their curriculum vitae. We could then confirm that through looking them up to make sure they're real publications, things like that, right? Like that's biodata. Those are objective things that we could measure. Specific cognitive ability might be another stand-in for advanced knowledge in a specific discipline. So we might want to give an IQ test of some sort to make sure that, yes, you may know the subject matter, but are you do you have the cognitive skills to be able to teach this content? Same thing, same process with the advanced knowledge in broader domains, but we would add in maybe a general cognitive ability test rather than a specific cognitive ability test. So there are things that are objectively just measurable in both of these categories of knowledge, but there are also things that maybe we might want to find a predictor for. Under the skills, for a professor, we expect some research skills, and probably the easiest, most accurate way to determine whether they have research skills is to look at their publication record. If they have no publications, we're not sure that, yeah, they may have engaged in research, but is it good research? Is it publishable research? Is it meaningful research? Well, if it's never been published, it's hard to make that judgment. Maybe they've got a lot of things under review or things that could stand in for it. But so that's one that probably you would just rely on biodata, things that you could look at. Advising skills. This is another one that's kind of difficult to pin down, right? Advising skills, that's a really vague characterization of a skill, isn't it? Because what goes into advising? Well, knowledge of like the criteria within your program, that's one factor that goes into advising skills. If you don't know what is required of this particular major, you're not going to get very good advising. But there are other aspects that make people good or bad advisors. Some of it's personality. I would say maybe conscientiousness would be a valuable skill for a good advisor. Maybe a little bit of extroversion. Maybe you don't have to be the most extroverted person in the world, but to be able to do advising, you have to have face-to-face contact. Probably you need to be able to, be at least enough outgoing that you're willing to talk to other people. So maybe we could use something like a personality test, like the Big Five inventory, to get at characteristics that would be helpful for advising. Maybe we could pick up some of these characteristics through the interview. We could find out whether you're the sort of person who can talk off the cuff, be specific, have the kind of personality that might be useful in advising. So maybe the interview would be helpful for that. And then under the ability category, a professor needs to have college level reading and writing ability. Well, again, that maybe we could confirm that with their publications. Maybe during their work sample, we would be able to tell whether they have that level of reading and writing by how their PowerPoints were designed or other kinds of things that they're using during their job talk. Communication ability, again, the interview would be really helpful for that. Giving the job talk, a work sample would be really helpful for that. So notice there's a bunch of different kinds of predictors possible for these different case outs, right? So far we've got biodata. We've got maybe an IQ test, an intelligence test, maybe that measures, maybe in one test, both specific and general cognitive abilities. Maybe we're going to administer a personality test. We're going to give an interview and we're going to ask them to do a work sample. I mean, that's a lot of things that we're talking about using as predictors, right? So by laying it out like this and saying, okay, what do we need and how could we measure those things? We start homing in on what predictors we're going to need to use to find, to whatever. So I'm going to skip over that since we're not together. Okay. So styles of tests. Something that's gotten very popular in modern times is the computer adaptive testing. So if we maybe are interviewing for a job, the first thing they might ask us to do is sit down at the computer and complete a test. My son has his CompTIA A+ certification to repair computers, and he was going for a job that asked for the CompTIA A+, and then it said preferred the CompTIA, I think it's called N or something, I don't know what it is, but it's a networking one that he had the classes, but he had never done the certification for. The first thing they had them do as they were applying for the test was sit down at a computer and take a computer adaptive quiz kind of situation that asked questions about not just building computers, but also the networking component that he goes, oh yeah, I think I'm qualified. I've had the classes. I just haven't taken the test to get the certification. And so he goes to the interview, he sits down at the adaptive test. And once you get one item wrong, it then puts you down like a pathway of, you're going to have to dig out of that to be recognized as somebody who actually does know the material. And so he goes, I got one wrong really early on the networking one, and I don't think I ever dug out of that hole. That happens with adaptive quizzing. Once you get one wrong, even if you know more of the stuff down the line, once you're down in the, I got one wrong, you're sort of having to answer multiples of questions to get yourself back to the level as if you hadn't missed one. The beauty of it is we can sort people out. If we have a lot of applicants for something, that adaptive quizzing is a great way to go. You know what? Go back and study some more, get your certification, come back, apply. So it's quick, it's accurate. It may be more precise than some of the other tests that we're talking about. I'm always a little suspect when I say that this would be more precise or better. I'm not going to confidently say that, but I'm going to say it might be more precise than some of the other things we could use. Depending on what kind of job you're applying for, you might be asked to do a speed test. There's speed and then there are power tests. A speed test is something like a typing test. Back in the olden days, if you wanted to be like, the job I had at the bank was a clerk typist. And let's be honest, the vast majority of my job was typing. And so when they went to hire me, they gave me a typing test, and I had to type at least 65 words a minute to be able to be hired into the job. So they gave me easy things to do. I had to type, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy brown dog and stuff. And I think they actually, once I passed over that and they said it was 65 words per minute, then they had me do kind of a little bit of another kind of speed test that was a little bit more complicated, where I had to format a letter with the headers and all the things you have to do, whatever in a letter. Short time limit, I had 1 minute to type 65 words. And then when I went to the letter formatting assignment, I think I was given 3 minutes to transcribe this handwritten letter onto a correctly formatted letter, that kind of thing. And the objective score is how many items did you complete. And so, I was given 1 minute to type. I think I got 80. I used to type really fast. I don't think I type that fast anymore. I don't need to. Who sits there and transcribes people's handwritten stuff anymore? But I used to type really fast. So I passed that. And then with the letter thing, I don't think I got all the way through the letter in my 3 minutes, but I got enough of it that they said I qualified. So that would be a good example of a speed test, right? A power test, maybe you've taken the SAT. That's the kind of power test that sort of gives insight into whether you're qualified to go to college or not. Difficult items. Now on the SAT, there is a fixed time limit for each section. So SAT is probably not a perfect example of a power test, because in some work-related power tests, they just tell you to get it done. They, just tell you, here's what you need to do, come back when you're done. And they don't take it away from you unless, I guess, the place is closing and it's time to go. But your score, again, is going to be the number of items that you could get correct in this power situation. Another issue of testing is, can we administer it in a group setting, or does it need to be administered in an individual setting? Individual tests are much more costly. So a lot of times organizations will try as hard as they can to use group tests. I know in my own research, I try to do group tests as much as I can because of the time constraints, right? It takes a lot more time to administer tests one by one in a lab. A lot faster. I almost said easier. I mean, it is easier in some ways to do it in a group. It's more complicated in some ways to do it in a group. I really, 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 really wanted my current experiment to be done in a group setting because of the speed, but we would have been sacrificing accuracy. I could not construe how in the world we would have multiple people in the room and not mess up the cognitive test that we were doing. So we had to resort to individual tests, even though it is more costly. I had to recruit a lot of undergraduates to help me to administer the test in the lab one at a time so that it can get done maybe this quarter, hopefully, maybe. And that's a problem for employers, right? They always want to save money. They always want to save time. And then another issue with regard to how to administer a test is whether it'll be paper and pencil or on a computer bubbling things or some kind of response like that versus a performance test. Paper and pencil test would be anything that is, you're giving rote answers. Cognitive ability tests are like that. It could be essay, multiple choice, true, false, short answer, Likert scale. It could be any kind of format. We like paper and pencil tests a lot in psychology because they're quick to administer. They tend to have very accurate and consistent scoring, and so we like them a lot. Performance tests is where you're actually going to do the job. My best example of a performance test was when I was working as a hostess at a diner-style restaurant, and they were hiring a new waitress, and So somebody came in, had their interview, and they had to do a performance test. And when the person left, I said, "Oh, are you going to hire that person?" And the manager said, "Oh no, they don't really know what they're doing." I go, "How do you know that? Like, what did you see that let you know that they didn't know?" And she said, "Well, I asked the person to carry 3 plates and 2 coffee cups, and they put their fingers between the 2 plates that were on their hand, and if there had actually been food." A, their finger could have gotten in the food, and B, their finger might have gotten smashed between 2 plates. Like, that's not how you carry 2 plates. And so she actually trained me how you carry the 2 plates, so that later when it was time for me to try and get promoted to waitress, I knew how to carry the plates, right? But that was a really good example of a performance test, right? Show me how you would carry 3 plates. And she looked at the person's hands and said, "Yeah, you're not qualified." What a great way to know whether a person really knows what they're doing or not, right? I was blown away on that performance test. But so lots of jobs have that kind of thing. A performance test might be, a mechanic would be able to do a performance test. Okay, do an oil change, or whatever we're doing here. Demonstrate how you would do it. I think in the training of doctors and stuff, there are these kinds of performance tests. So they're very generalizable to lots of different kinds of employment. And so it's just they're a little harder, they're time consuming, there's some risk associated depending on what the performance is that you're doing. So they can be problematic in certain ways, but they definitely can be a really easy, you can do it, you can't do it kind of decision factor too. All right, let's come back, and in the next segment we will talk about cognitive ability tests.